Introducing Recorded Content, a podcast for small, scrappy B2B marketing teams who want to get the most out of podcasting. In each episode, we capture stories from industry experts and podcasters. Listen in and uncover what it takes to launch, run, and grow a successful B2B podcast. Check out and subscribe to the show on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows. Let's jump in.
Hey, I'm Tristan. I'm the co-founder of Motion and your host for this episode of Recorded Content. The show is brought to you by my company, Motion. We are a done-for-you podcast agency for small, scrappy B2B tech marketers. Now, it's crucial to get your company's leadership to share their distinct point of view. When your company's leaders communicate how you solve a problem and why you're different, it helps your company stand alone in the market. And podcast guest appearances are a great way to share your ideas, connect with new audiences, and also build deeper relationships. But a lot of marketers don't know how to get their executives on relevant shows. They don't understand how to conduct research to ensure the appearance is really a good fit. Trent Anderson is the head of revenue operations at Podchaser, a company providing the world's most comprehensive podcast database. The company powers podcast discovery for listeners, creators, and brands. And in this episode, we'll uncover how you can find the best podcasts for guest appearances. And we'll also explore effective ways to conduct research so your company can get the most out of podcasts overall. All right, Trent, well, thanks for joining me today. Welcome to Recorded Content here.
Love it. Glad to be here, Tristan. Been a big fan of yours and looking forward to unpacking all these delicious podcast tidbits.
Good. Well, before we get into some of those details, I have a question for you. I was digging through some archived appearances that you've been on, some other shows. I was listening to an episode, you were on the Funky Marketing podcast, which I believe was almost a year ago now. It was even before you were at Podchaser, and you got into a conversation. Let me just pull up some of this stuff here. There was a quote that stood out to me. You said that storytelling is like wrapping information in an emotional blanket. And I thought that was interesting. What did you mean by that? Like, for our audience, paint that picture for us real quick.
Yeah, I probably stole that from Sir Robert McKee, the author of so many storytelling books that exist out there. But information can be delivered any which way. Obviously, it's commoditized now in the age of the internet. The finite details are more accessible than they've ever been. So how do you actually drive decisions? How do you drive influence? Well, it has to have some level of emotion. And emotion is actually pretty easy to put into data and put into stats and just like general info, because what we're looking for in story is pattern interrupts and violation of expectations, which is why most case studies, let's just say on a B2B SaaS site, are first we did this, and then we did this, and then we did that, and that got client X outcome. It's vanilla, right? Doesn't leave me feeling too inspired that this is the right fit for me, versus a storytelling version, which should be, we came in with these expectations, but then this happened, i.e., but then the fundraising round closed out, so we only had $1 million in runway left. But because of that, we had a couple key members of the team jump ship. So instead of packing up our bags and going home, we chose to take this route. And because of that, we did this. And because of that, we accomplished that. And now this is the future state that has been earned as part of the journey, if you will, that the company went through. So storytelling is really, the violation of expectations. And those pattern interrupts are what stick out in our brain. There's so much literature about how we've developed as a species because of these violations of expectations. So I think the guidance there is always to, anytime you have an and, replace it with a but and see what happens. And that's been a crucial life lesson that I've learned.
Yeah, I can't remember where I found this, but it might be Park Howell. I'm not sure if you're familiar with his work, the Business of Story podcast. I've had him on Recorded Content before, but someone said that but is almost the most important word in the English language, because anything that happens after the but is like where the conflict is. And that's the core tension to any story. And Park Howell has the and but therefore framework. Have you ever heard of that?
I have. Yeah. Powerful.
Yeah. I use that quite honestly to set up just about all of my podcast episodes. Like if you go and look at
Saw
the
that.
guest guidelines,
Yeah,
that's
that's
it. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
that's classic and but therefore
Yeah.
structure. So it's interesting that you bring that up because there are a lot of people that come to that same conclusion from different angles. And I thought it was interesting how you phrase that based on your experience and what interests you about storytelling.
Yeah.
And that's a good segue into podcasting because I feel like podcasting is a mechanism to combine those two things, right? Where you have this information and data and there's some examples there, but then you also need to add the color of the emotion and some of the storytelling techniques that would really make like a case study or any other dry story or example a little bit more colorful and relevant to the audience. So with that said, like what drew you to Podchaser and podcasting from some of the previous work that you were doing?
Yeah. So I came from an agency background. So I've always been in and around content marketing. The agency that I first started my career at, we were one of the first HubSpot agency partners. So I was all bought in on inbound marketing and not having to make cold calls and publishing content that people actually wanted to read. Obviously, times have changed a little bit, like look at LinkedIn and the death of the MQL. So don't want to go too far down that path. But
Yeah.
I always kind of sold marketing for a living or marketed sales for a living, which was an interesting spot. And my first agency, I had no business sitting in some of these executive boardrooms that I was sitting in. 23, 24-year-old kid talking to a CMO or a CEO, really well-known brands. And I started to reflect on that. Like, why am I here? Like, why am I getting these opportunities to pitch like a couple 100,000 e-commerce total overhauls to legacy brands that were entering, the brave new world of e-com. And it's because we used our founder's story. And I started to learn my founder's story like the back of my hand. And what's so cool about that is it wasn't even mine. It was Wilbur Yu, and shout out to Wilbur. This I think is a huge element of UTech's success. People bought it hook, line, and sinker, and they thought a lot of times that they were sitting next to like the next Mark Zuckerberg or somebody that knew something about tech. So again, I was 23, 24 years old. I had just dropped out of law school, and here I am having like high level conversations with CMOs about, a couple 100,000 and sometimes $1 million projects because they were captivated by the story.
Yeah.
So that was a core tenet that what I thought to be some of my success, even though it was borrowed success. So I was already kind of predisposed to the story thing. And through kind of a mutual connection, a mutual friend, I learned of a company that was building a storytelling tool, primarily for screenwriting at first. But then as I kind of got my hands dirty and I'd run a couple podcasts myself, run meaning I failed at running them. I was one of the victims of the, not making it past 6 podcasts. And why was that? Again, there's a lot of reasons, but in any case, I knew that this thing called story was really starting to pick up steam in a lot of the communities that I was interacting in, but it was really difficult to do. So everyone was looking at Andy Raskin and strategic narrative and saying like, this is amazing, but like the execution side of it, it's tough. Like it's really tough. That's why there's only one Andy Raskin. That's why there's only one Donald Miller.
Yeah.
So in any case, I thought, man, if we could get this product out to market and evangelize it, this is going to be really cool. And we had some really good success, some really interesting customers. It's still operational. So shout out to Sam and David as the product continues to grow. But that's actually
That's the storyboard app, right? It's like interactive storyboards almost. I was checking that out.
Yep,
yeah.
That's exactly
What's
right.
the name of the company?
Prewrite.com.
Prewrite, that's right.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunity there. We got to meet the former SVP of content at YouTube through that. So we started to dabble into video content as well and podcasts. And that's where the syncing up with Podchaser came into play. So Podchaser had just launched their API. We thought, man, how cool would it be if we could get creator credits or guest credits populated into our storytelling app for podcasters to have their research effectively done for them right away. So you mentioned my previous podcast appearances. We thought, man, if we could get everybody's previous podcast appearances directly within our app, we would have a much easier time doing research. So that's where I met Cole. And Cole is the co-founder and CRO of Podchaser. And when I was spinning down my work at the end of 2021 and looking to do the next thing, I just pinged him and I said, hey, I think what you guys are building is cool. Looking for the next step in my career. What do you guys have going on? And that's when that bridge was crossed.
Got it. So Trent, you mentioned you had some failed podcasts.
Yeah.
So and you didn't get past that infamous, pod fade,
Yep.
whether it's 5 or 7 episodes, depending on which research you pull from.
Right.
It's one of the two or whatever. Like what happened there? Like what was the biggest obstacle that you faced where you couldn't get over that hurdle?
Yeah, I could have used someone like you, truly, at that point in time. And I did this with Pre-Write, and I did it with Lead Leo. So both of them. I was really inspired by the model that Sweetfish had built. So, James and Dan and all those guys and gals. And I thought this is like the perfect way we're going to get great conversations going with people that we know should be using our product. And I think that was the limiting element of it. So it was mostly like, how can these people help serve our interests and more and less about like, how can we help our audience? Because we didn't have an audience, learn something new. And that's a really interesting part, because I think the audience building angle is what I became somewhat obsessed with after that. And now I see this every single day at Podchaser. A lot of podcasts stall out because if you're shouting into the void, you don't have an audience, you have very little motivation to keep going. And that's where I think some of this community embedded growth is what the phrase I'm trying to coin, I think is the new or the next wave of B2B podcasting. And obviously we can look at a breakout success like Chris Walker and Refine Labs, but you've got this mutual group accountability that exists when you do something live and people are counting on you to show up and you're delivering great content day in and day out. So it's less of an extraction. It's more of a go give. And if you're familiar with Bob Berg's book, The Go Giver, like I think that's what Chris does insanely well. He knows that maybe 2% of his audience is actually going to end up becoming a client, but he's helping so many demand marketers and salespeople and marketers of all kinds get better at their job and level up. And he's not doing it because he wants them to become customers. So in any case, that's a long-winded way of saying I was being really selfish with the way that we were running the podcast. And then you add that and compound that to all the post-production and chopping things up into social content. And I'm not a video editor, right? Like it just takes a lot of time. We were using cool tools like Headliner and Canva, and like it was passable for sure. But you do an hour episode and then 2-3 hours of post-production, like you're finally like exhausted and you finally hit post on a video on LinkedIn and you're like, geez, I want to put my feet up, but there's still more work to do. So in any case, I think that's
when it starts.
That's exactly right. Like so much of podcasting success right now, I think, is dependent on distribution thereafter, which I think you guys are doing incredibly well with how you chop up and make beautiful content. So that's how I've failed twice.
Appreciate that. And you mentioned like with that, these examples here, you mentioned community embedded growth. And I think there's some different ways to look at that. And I didn't really have this in mind, but I want to ask you about it because I think I see it with a lot of prospects and customers that we interact with, where there's this notion that you need a big audience, you need like a lot of downloads, and you need to grow and grow and grow that audience. But if you're talking about, if we even use Chris Walker as an example, a lot of the work that he did early on was just a really small, tight-knit community, maybe 10, 15, 20 people initially in those live events. And it's a really small community that doesn't grow exponentially, but it's like you get that really tight-knit community for that feedback to ensure that the information's really good. And that's how you build. I mean, what is your thought around like where people come at podcasting where, the goal is just to have that like hockey stick growth that's continually going up and to the right, but that's like at odds with really what you need to do with podcasting and have that rich information. So what's your thought there?
I think especially in B2B, people are doing the same thing that the same playbook they're rolling out with the hockey stick growth like you're talking about. There's a lot of ways how their go-to-market strategy works from a sales and marketing perspective too. And it's almost like driving as many MQLs as you can. They're never going to close just to show that you have exponential growth over, month over month, quarter over quarter. However, if you're actually attracting best fit marketing and sales opportunities as opposed to any fit, you end up having a much healthier pipeline, much heavier influence over your industry. And I think that same failed mindset about MQLs is the same thing that's driving like people only caring about pure download numbers. And that's like one thing it's an interesting thing, and it's a fight I'm trying to wage in the podcasting community and podcasting ecosystem overall. Is like, do downloads really even matter? I guess somewhat as a directionally accurate element, but I've written a little bit about listenership is so much more important, and return listeners are so much more important. And then getting like the high intent signals through distribution channels is infinitely more important than a pure download number. And like what I always like to say is, I have Spotify on my phone, I have Apple on my phone, and I have like SoundCloud, right? I use Spotify almost exclusively, but I have 50 shows on Apple that are automatically downloaded. Now, I never listen to them. And even on Spotify, like I might only listen to 2 or 3 shows regularly. So you have the entire industry basing their success off of download number, when listenership is very, very seldom like really considered. And this isn't just like for content purposes. This is like advertising purposes as well. Like I see huge brands making 6-7 figure decisions based on a download number that really isn't a North Star metric at all. So in any case, it worries me a little bit about some of that bleed over too, from like the old radio days or old TV days with dynamic insertion. Like those are cool. It's cool technology. I love it. Like you can get really targeted with it, but it doesn't mean that you're actually getting your message to the right people. And again, just to close that loop with how Chris does it, I still listen to State of Demand Gen every time an episode comes out. I was at the very first one. So when it was him and Chris and Gaetano, and there were probably 25 of us. I stay in regular contact with probably 10 people that were on that call. I think 3 of which are now employees of Refine Labs, which is really interesting. And that's the tribe element, right? Like if you keep banging this drum and you have something relevant to say, and you're pulling back the curtain and talking about things that people know in their heart, but can't say out loud, like you start to just have a huge magnetic attraction. So shout out to Chris for that. And then I've developed some great friendships. Like I have an awesome mentor, Matthew Ray Scott, who's been like just an incredible mentor for me, and that we met through Demand Gen Live. So what's interesting though, when I still listen to episodes, I still hear some of like the 5 or 10 people that were on that first episode that keep coming back. So that's where I say like audience is super important. How do you build an audience? You create content around it. You cast stones selectively and poke holes and call it like orthodox ways of thinking. So if you offer like a heterodox or even like a counterintuitive position, people say, wait a second, that's different. That's a point of view that I've always thought, but no one else has articulated. So that's it. By virtue is going to attract people. Now, how much that attracts people, that's when you go from audience to community. So I think a lot of podcasts would do infinitely better if marketers, brands, et cetera, started building audience and then community. And then ultimately, again, if the content is resonant, like by virtue, you're going to find your tribe. And that's where I think this community embedded growth exists. Because all it is word of mouth, right? And word of mouth at scale.
Yeah. And in order to get there, like to get to that detail or to find that space where you're able to build a community in that tribe, it's important to understand like what other podcasts are out there, or like what other people are listening to. And a big problem is discovery, which we've talked about before we jumped on this session a little bit. But so let's get into Podchaser a little bit, where we have the big headline on the website is right now podcast reach, demographics, and content and contacts, at your fingertips. So what prompted that headline? Like what major problems being solved there?
Yeah. So just talking about podcasts overall and the lack of discovery, it's a highly fragmented industry. So you have major platforms, you have Spotify, you have Apple, we talked a little bit about, you have YouTube now getting into the podcast game as they're going to be ingesting RSS feeds. Facebook tried it, and as you probably saw, they just got out of it. So you have dozens and dozens of other like mid-sized and small players. And that's so difficult for almost anyone, and to like really get the distribution that you're going to need from a platform perspective. And I think one of the brilliant things that Spotify did was acquiring Anchor, because Anchor ended up solving a lot of the platform distribution problems, right? So if you're not familiar, Anchor is a hosting platform service. You just basically hit publish, and then it distributed it to all the major hosting podcast players and all that good stuff. So Spreaker, Breaker, it was tough to get into Apple because obviously Apple and Spotify aren't friends. But in any case, that was a huge opportunity for podcasters to get distribution to the major platforms. However, that didn't solve the audience discovery problem, right? So just because you were there, just because you built it, does not mean that they will come. So I think to circle back to your point, like the contact information perspective, the audience reach perspective, you have dozens and dozens of different data points and different data sources, and there was no way to aggregate it across all of these sources. And that's what Podchaser was effectively built to do. So if we aggregate all the data, all the information, instead of trusting a podcaster's word, so again, we talk about downloads, some people like to throw out downloads or say like, hey, I'm number one in X category. Well, it turns out there's, 3 players in that category, and it's just per some random, chart or what have you. So in any case, Podchaser was really built to aggregate all this data in one spot. And how does that serve podcasters? Well, now you have a line of sight across the entire ecosystem, finally. So you've got information from your hosting provider, as well as all the platforms in which your show is actually being played. From the listener perspective as well, and a lot of people don't know this, but we have 600,000 podcast listeners come to our site monthly, and that's like almost 3 million page views. And those are all podcast listeners. So like the aggregation of all of that data with all of the users that get generated on our site, we see really interesting trends about what's popping, what's popular, what's emergent, what's trending. And again, that's fueling additional discovery. Let's back up a little bit about discovery and talk about like discovery on platforms. So how do you get discovered on Spotify? Somebody puts in your name and puts in podcast. So, okay, well, how are they going to hear about your name to begin with? Well, we could talk about social distribution there, or we can talk about maybe a guest appearance on another podcast that they had heard, and that's how they found you. Okay, there's Spotify. Apple had an interesting one. Our friend at Buzzsprout, Albin, released that interesting alleged thing that happened with one of the major podcast networks that's publicly funded, and how they were maintaining basically dominance over charts because they were running paid ads to stay there. So if I'm an independent podcaster, I'm saying like, gosh, I'd really like to get featured on Apple one of these days, but I've got this 3-letter behemoth that's standing in my way because they're dumping like unlimited amounts of funds into, I don't want to say gaming, but again, this is all alleged. But they're dumping money to make this happen. And I'm just an indie podcaster that's got a story to tell. So that's broken. And then you start to look at like reviews and ratings. Apple has come out and said like that doesn't really help discoverability much. So again, if I'm a listener, I want my voice to be heard. If I enjoyed the episode, I want that to mean something to the podcast. I want to support that, which again is another part of this embedded community growth, in my opinion. So anyway, when we zoom back into like the Podchaser aspect, we want to take all of those things into account. We want to take ratings, reviews, followership, the engagement, the community that's being built around these awesome podcasts. We want that to actually mean something as opposed to just spitting out a chart. We have charts, obviously. We have categories, obviously. But again, like how are you serving the audience? And that's, I think, what is just so core to what we do. And that's the origin story of Podchaser. Bradley, our CEO, and he went on to Reddit and he said, I can't believe that there's not like a database that exists for all these podcasts. So that's when he put a little note out into the world, and Ben, who's our CTO, who lives in Australia, was like, yeah, we could build something like that. And it was because they wanted to make an easier way for people to find their next favorite podcast. And so through the ingestion of data and tapping into RSS feeds, and then overlaying additional data points throughout the years, last 5 years, it's got us to where we're at today. And that's driving discovery for now, not just listeners, not just shows, but agencies, brands, advertisers, networks, and everywhere in between.
So Trent, you're talking so discovery from the listener side,
Yeah.
and there's a big piece of this too, which I want to switch to because it'll be interesting to get your thoughts here. Because Podchaser, you actually come at this from a couple of different angles, and one of those that we deal with a lot is guest
Yep.
opportunities on other shows, which is also this other side of podcasting that presents a lot of advantages, especially for brands where they can pull in their founder
Yep.
and or even some other executives, some thought leaders, so to speak, within their company. And then they can get in front of other audiences. They can share some of their stories, just some of the problems that they're solving with their companies. And it's just a different way to get in front of other folks that might be your core target audience. So, when I'm looking at guest opportunities, what is the problem, or why is it so hard to find good shows to reach out to and to align with our founder or what have you at our tech company?
There's not really an open source way of finding contact information or show analytics or audience insights, right? A lot of what we do on the Podchaser side is make that available to teams, to various folks within an industry, a lot of publicists, a lot of marketers, obviously a lot of founding teams as well. And the interesting part of all of that is, I think, the aggregation of all the data. So like, sure, you can pop into Zoom Info and find somebody's contact information. And if you know that they host a show, like you can spin up a cold pitch and do it that way. But you still don't have the analytics. You don't know what their audience looks like. You don't know what their listenership looks like. Okay, well, maybe I've got the information out of Zoom Info, and now I can go download a media kit off of the website. Then again, the North Star metric's probably going to be downloads, and it's probably going to be information that's been provided by the hosting provider, not across all of the platforms. So you've got some information, but now we're talking two-step process. Now the third part of it is, okay, what kind of reach are they getting on social media? Because let's assume that they're going to post this podcast across their own channels, whether it's Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, whatever. Now you have to pop into all of their owned channels on those and figure out, like, do they have a big following or not? After this gets posted, am I going to get additional reach or additional lift in the content? And that's where all of those things happen directly within Podchaser. So
So real quick,
go ahead.
real quick, Trent, because I wasn't familiar with that. So with the social aspect,
Yeah.
which the distribution is really big now with podcasts, like how is Podchaser handling that for a show?
Yeah.
Could
So
you walk through that?
we pull in the social profiles right now for Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook. And what that does is we pull it in, we aggregate it across the graph, and then we start to see audience makeup based on followership. Now, huge question is always like, well, just because someone follows you on Twitter, does that mean they're going to be a listener of your podcast? By itself in a vacuum, maybe not. But when you aggregate it across the entire audience pool, so again, across all of the shows or all of the channels, that is where we are a lot more directionally accurate about that. And what's really cool to see too is when you zoom out from a macro lens, you can start to see things like which shows are popular with fans of the Tesla brand that are age 25 to 34, that have a household income of 70 grand or above, and that live in New York, San Francisco, and Chicago.
Hmm.
By us pulling in the social graph for all of those data points, if that's who you're going after, call it like tech early adopters is how I would describe that audience that I just pointed out. If that's important to you, you can surface those insights through Podchaser, and that's going to give you a much better sense of, is this a good show for me to be a part of, or for me to get my point of view across? If you're running a wearable device company that is going to market and it's a competitor to Aura or Whoop or whatever, that'd probably be a great audience for you to go after. So now that you've got that assembled and you have the host contact information or the producer contact information, you can reach out to them directly and say, hey, here's my unique point of view. Here's my origin story. Here's the founding story of the company. Here's how this is going to serve your audience. And again, this really started to crystallize for me about all of this after my failed attempts at running a podcast.
Yeah.
The best outreach that we see in across all of our clients is here's how this story, here's how my guest opportunity is going to serve your audience, Mr. or Mrs. Host. And so that's just a little tip and a quick aside, but those types of data points are, again, what's driving a lot of the interest on our Podchaser Pro platform.
So I want to get into like how I would start. Let's say if I am a founder and I have a small marketing team I'm working with, I want to get into some of the building blocks
Yeah.
there to how to properly do research and outreach. Before we do that, I'm hoping from your perspective, you can tell me, like, why in the world would a founder want to go on other podcasts? Like, what's the big benefit there from your perspective?
Yeah, it's such a compound positive tactic, right? So you appear on a podcast like I'm doing right now. I know that you've got amazing production value. You're going to distribute this across social. You're going to distribute it across your own podcast. It's probably going to live on 5 or 6 different channels. You may or may not give source files to guests. I don't know if we can do that. That'd be sweet too. And now this is allowing me to tap into your known audience, and I can extract probably 5 to 10 videos out of this so I can cut them up. I can use those videos to distribute across my social channels. I can use the transcript to write social copy, newsletter copy, blog copy. So like one appearance, like we're at 30 minutes right now, one 30-minute conversation turns into 20, 30, maybe even 50 pieces of content, depending on how micro you want to get with it. So when I talk to founders about this, I say, do you want to hire a team of 5 marketers, one videographer, one audio person, one graphic designer, one social media person, and one content marketer? Or do you just want to show up for one 30-minute conversation, hour-long conversation, and have the compound positive of distribution across all those channels that I just mentioned, and 90% of this work is done for you because the hosts are amazing at doing this? Becomes pretty clear. It's like, okay, what's the value prop? What's the ROI? I can stand up basically an entire marketing motion just by going out and telling my story. And to me, like, that's incredibly compelling from an earned media perspective. And that earned translates into owned. And oh, by the way, if you know that the host audience is your target demographic, you could even rip out some of the creative and content to run against as paid media as well. So again, it's like a measure 15 times cut once type of engagement.
Yeah, and I like the earned to owned piece, and I feel like that's where a lot of folks drop the ball. They don't get source files perhaps from the host or the producer, and they don't really kind of cycle it back through their own marketing channels as well as they should. They just say, I'm going to do an appearance, and I'm going to go get in front of that audience, and that's good. That's great. But it's like, well, you can reshape that and kind of pull it back in, build some credibility around your company, show that you're out here doing some other appearances. You're in the industry. You're one of the thought leaders or influencers in the space, and you're kind of tapped in to the community. And I feel like a lot of people do drop the ball there. So with that said, let's talk about how, if I am a founder and I have a small marketing team, let's say, so through that lens, how do I find good opportunities for me, that align with my audience? Like, how do I use Podchaser for that? How's that work?
Yeah. So a lot of people will stick with what they know. So if you're selling a CRM, what people usually do is let's find shows that talk about CRMs. That's great. There's probably dozens, if not up to 1,000 shows that are purely focused on CRM. That's the first layer. And you have so many more opportunities outside of that. And this is what I'm trying to evangelize to all of our customers and to our prospects as well. Who uses a CRM system? Salespeople. What's the biggest problem that a lot of salespeople have with their CRM systems? Well, they're too manual. That takes time out of sales. Like actual selling time. Okay, so maybe we can expand outside of just people talking about CRM, and now we can talk about sales and sales tech. Okay, so there's one. Who else relies on CRM? Maybe we can find shows that are talking about how CFOs are ramping reporting better for their board or for their C-suite team members through better data coming out of their CRM system. So think about like the one topic and then expand out. So like who's using that topic? How are they impacted by that topic? And then like what are the tangential features, benefits, use cases that are all serving what you thought was your core product. And that's obviously in a B2B lens. In a B2C lens, I have a very interesting anecdote. Major global marketing agency you've all heard of. You've all seen the dude's name. It's plastered all over the place. They came to us and said, hey, we want to find shows that are about bacon. One of our clients is a bacon brand. I said, cool. We can definitely find shows about bacon. But like, is that going to drive more bacon sales? Like, are we going to have to convince the host that like, this is a better brand of bacon? It's more conducive to baconry or whatever. And we start to
Is baconry a thing?
It is now. It was maybe in the hipster IPA era. So then we start saying, okay, what do you know about your target audience? Like, what do you know about bacon eaters? And case in point, like I look like your prototypical Midwestern bearded bacon eater, right? Like that's I'm the persona. So when I'm saying, okay, when do I eat bacon? I eat bacon when it's wrapping other meat, because that's what we do here in the Midwest. Where do I eat a lot of meat? Football tailgates. What else am I doing at football tailgates? I'm drinking beer. So you start to expand that and they say, this isn't just like me giving an anecdote, Mr. and Mrs. Agency. There's another company that's doing this, Traeger, who incidentally is using bacon in a lot of their grilling products. And they're a keynote sponsor of the Dan Patrick Show, which is a huge sports and entertainment show that's on, I think it's on NBC Peacock now, but Traeger has a ton of brand activations in which they're getting call outs to get people to buy more meat and use it for tailgates. So again, like let's talk about bacon podcast to let's find out who's eating the most bacon. When are they eating that bacon? And what is this bacon being paired with? And you start to find a lot more opportunities outside of just like what exists in that first concentric circle.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I had someone else on the podcast not too long ago, and we were talking about things on the fringe.
Yeah.
I think it's another way to put it. It's like trying to think about what other things or topics, subjects intersect with your audience's interests. And in order to get there, I think you have to really understand your audience quite a bit. But let's say if I'm running this small marketing team for a founder and we think we have a good understanding of our audience, maybe we're running our own show or maybe we're not, maybe we've done some guest appearances. How do I then use Podchaser to seek out those shows and actually take the next step to get an appearance in place?
Yeah. So the first thing you do is go into Podchaser Pro. You can start your search either from a category level or from a keyword level. And so again, we talked about like, what's the initial topic and then what are the concentric circles that are spinning off of that. So that's first. Then you're going to be able to filter. So one of the filters that obviously is important to this scenario has guest appearances. If they have a guest appearance flag, that means you should probably consider pitching them. If they don't have a guest appearance flag, you should probably skip it, right?
And how do you all determine that guest appearance flag?
Yeah, so that all comes through the format of the show. So our data science team looks at a couple different key factors. One is length of episodes, another is the show notes as well, and the meta descriptions and metadata that get pulled through on the actual feeds. So we can determine, yes, likely to have guests or unlikely to have guests. Now you can always,
because that's not something I do as like a producer. I don't say, so it's some data that you're deriving from some other elements.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So that'd be the first filter you'd want to pass through. The next filter that we always look at is power score. So we talked a lot about how I'm fighting the fight against download being the North Star metric for the industry. Well, what am I replacing it with? I'm replacing it with the power score metric, which is our proprietary piece of data that's comprised of 30 different data points. It's taking into account popularity and listenership, of course, because that's really important, but it's also taking into account engagement. It's taking into account reviews. It's taking into account the social elements that we talked about as being super important for distribution. So the power score number really should serve as the North Star. I would say most shows that have an 80 or 90 power score are probably going to be outside the realm of most founders, unless you're, a Series B founder that just raised $200 million and like you've got the world wrapped around your finger, right? People are probably going to seek you out as opposed to you having to seek guest or hosting opportunities or guesting opportunities yourself. So what we usually do is tell people to throttle that down, anywhere power score between 70 and or 20 and 70 is usually a good place to start. Then you can add additional filters such as known audience demographics. So if you want to find shows that are skewing more heavily male, female, doesn't matter, you can not toggle that. If you want to filter shows by audiences of certain age brackets, you can do that as well. And then if you have any sort of like geographical elements that you want to take into account as well, you could also run that as a filter. So we work with a couple companies in the UK. They have an active initiative to get transatlantic opportunities. So they want to tap into US audiences and then vice versa. So those are all things that you can filter. Now, once you do that, it's going to spit out the list of shows that are going to be a fit based on those initial criteria. Then we have what's called our Insights tab, and that's only available through the Pro product. And through there, you can see which additional elements from an audience demographic level are important to you. So again, we talked about a little bit about brand affinity. We talked about influences. We talked about further drill down geographical elements as well. But there's also interesting things like employer. There's also interesting things like occupation and some of those additional demographic pieces of data. So now you've got a really good feeling as to, is this show actually speaking to my target audience? Just because it says it's the millennial marketing show, if that's what it is you're trying to go after, is your audience actually millennial marketers, or is it really salespeople that are in their 40s that are trying to get away from sales and enter into marketing for the first time, right? So these are all anecdotal pieces of data that are going to help you assess, hey, is this a good fit, great fit, or perfect fit, or is it not a fit at all? So what usually happens then is, hey, if it's a good fit, we're going to add it to a list. You can then export that list out as a CSV file. It's going to contain all of the contact information for all the shows. And you can follow all the shows as well. So as you go through time and see, hey, is this show a good fit for us? We want to see what kind of other guests they've been having on. It just gives you a lot more apples to apples information about, your candidacy there. So again, like once you've assessed, are these shows a fit? You got the contact information. Now you reach out with your point of view. Oftentimes it's a founder doing it directly, but other times it's the marketer or PR person, if they have that are reaching out to the shows, crafting a unique point of view and saying, hey, here's how this opportunity or this guest appearance is going to serve your audience, Mr. and Mrs. Host.
Yeah, and I see a lot of really bad outreach. I mean, it's very similar to what you see on the sales side as well, right? Where it's not crafted in a unique way. I mean, what is some of your thoughts around that? Like how to use some of this information to really be specific and unique to each one that you reach out to?
I talk about crafting a point of view quite a bit. And this kind of goes back to storytelling, like we talked about before, right? So a lot of the pitches that we see or on the receiving end of are, I did this and then I did this and I did that, and that's why you should have me on your show. Now, if you just change some of those ands to buts, you're going to have a lot more compelling story to tell, right? So, hey, I started this because I realized that discovery was broken within the podcasting world. Because of that, X happened. But it wasn't until I had this experience that I realized Z. Now that Z has occurred, A, B, and C are all running into one grand epiphany that I've had. And it's all based on experience, right? It's all based on like what you believe to be broken or what you're trying to solve. And again, it's got to come in a unique wrapped package around the story. So storytelling skills are transferable across all forms of communication and outreach. Podcast guest outreach is certainly one of those that's not excluded from that list.
Got it. And what do you think is a good time? Because you mentioned, if you're a founder, you might not be a fit for some of these
Yeah.
shows like that are highly visible with huge audiences. So when is it a good time for a founder to turn on that podcast guesting, uh, not channel, but that marketing initiative? Like when is it a good time, do you think?
Always.
Yeah.
In the simplest term, always, because you don't want to, let's say you have a bad quarter or you have a bad month or whatever, and then you're reactive. We need to get out there more. We need to get in front of our target audience. We can run paid ads against this, or we can run paid ads to get in front of our target audience, but it's not running the same because of post iOS 14 problems, whatever. So like the old adage, right? Like when's the best time to plant a tree? Well, 50 years ago. When's the second best time to plant a tree? Right now. So you never want to have to be reactive in marketing and sales and growth. You want to keep this always on. And again, like once you have your story down, you've got your POV nailed down, it's your story, right? You should be able to speak to it at all times. So it's just going to create a more virtuous cycle for the entire motion. And doesn't always have to be just the founder, right? There's really interesting people that are doing really interesting things with all elements or departments within the company. It's a great opportunity to get them out there and maybe show off some of their subject matter expertise as well.
Yeah, I mean, the good point is yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not a founder of Podchaser, but yet you're head of revenue ops, and here you are kind of working through the messaging
Yeah.
as well. And I think that's highly underestimated
Yep.
when it comes to podcast guest appearances. It gives you an opportunity as a founder or another leader within the company to work through your own messaging and to practice and to get in front of different people and say, here's my point of view. Here's an example. Here's how it works. Here's the problem that we solve. And I feel like a lot of times people will sit in front of a Google Doc and they'll play with copy over and over again versus why don't you just go out and have conversations and see what sticks with other people on the other side.
Yeah.
And then that'll give you some intel to maybe make some adjustments. When you come back and get into that Google Doc and you want to frame something up a little differently. So I think that's something that people just don't realize until they actually go through it.
100%. And what's unique to me, like one of my primary goals is to figure out who our best fit customers are and why. So for me to be able to tap into your audience and then after this gets posted, collect qualitative insights. Did people say, yeah, I agreed with this? Or people are like, if there weren't any comments on any of the posts, like, well, maybe something I said didn't hit right. Or maybe it wasn't like the right verbiage that I used to describe a problem. Those are all insights that I'll collect and take back to the team and to the market and say, hey, maybe if we're talking to podcasting done for you agencies, or we're talking to people that are intimately involved in the podcast production process, we might need to amend something. We might need to tweak something. And again, not enough people are doing that, I don't think. So it's just a really unique opportunity for me to test messaging in the wild.
Yeah. And to kind of close it up here, Trent, I'm curious how you're relatively new
Yeah.
at Podchaser. So I know when we got on that pre-call, you're like, yeah, I'm still trying to figure out some things
Yeah.
as well, even with the space itself and our product. Like how do you envision you all using more guest opportunities with not only yourself, but perhaps the founders? Like what's your thought process there?
Yeah, once a week, I actually do my own outreach to podcasts for guesting opportunities. And I do that mostly for a dog fooding experiment, right? So if we can't use our product to secure these opportunities, then how do we expect any of our customers to do that? And the results are awesome. So I think this will be the fourth show that I'll have appeared on since I started doing the outreach. And obviously, you and I have known each other for a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So that wasn't like a cold outreach, but the other three have been all cold outreaches. And it's, again, been a really instructive and informative way for me to gather like quality insights from the shows that I've appeared on. So there's that. As far as like how else we use the tool to help inform and drive like our own business, like what we're really excited about is the brand sponsor history that we just unveiled as part of the data set as well. And that is going to help us figure out which shows we should be considering, putting our money where our mouth is on. It's also going to help us figure out, hey, before we go and pitch this brand sponsor data package to customers, where is it fallible? Where is it infallible? How does it compare to some of the audience insights? So again, if I've got an audience insight, male 25 to 34, fan of Tesla, lives in New York, Chicago, LA, like I talked about in the example before, and I'm seeing that Manscaped is the biggest advertiser for shows that are catering to those audiences. Should I be pitching, a competitive product and getting this brand data into their workflow? So that's what's really cool about our platform, is because we live in this space and because we're active in this space, we get to test it out and see if it's going to inform better decisions from our go-to-market strategy.
Yeah, it's interesting. I view like what we do very similar. We're not on the tech side, obviously. We're on the service side, but you talk about eating your own dog food.
Yep.
It's like we do something very similar. So we go through a lot of the same pains, and we try a lot of the same things on our side, so that when, we're having conversations with customers, there's some built-in empathy there, right?
Yeah.
We're doing the same thing in a lot of cases. And I think that's a good opportunity for you, like you said, to actually use the product yourself. So you're a user, you get a sense of what the data is telling you, how you can use it, and then that can help you on the marketing side. And I think a lot of tech companies don't necessarily do that themselves, where they're actually users of their own product.
Yeah.
So kind of a unique advantage to you all, I would think. So Trent, that said, like where can folks go to find out more about you and Podchaser?
Yeah, I try to be pretty active on LinkedIn. So just search Trent Anderson on LinkedIn. I'm always posting experiments that I've done for our clients and what I've done for myself from that perspective too. So I published something the other day about the SEO lift of one of our clients' guest opportunities. That was really interesting. So we always read about all these blogs. Yeah, guest appearances are the new guest blogs, and it's great for SEO. I thought, well, that's awesome, but nobody ever publishes how many backlinks it generated or how much traffic it lifted. So I actually ran through a pretty hefty experiment with one of our clients and found some really interesting insights. Short answer is it's great for SEO. So I try to post content like that. And then if you want to tap into the Podchaser Pro platform, yeah, it's just podchaserpro.com is where you'll find a lot of the information that you'll need.
All right. Awesome. Trying to put that stuff in the show notes for everyone. And thanks again for jumping on. I mean, we'll be in touch for sure. You'll probably even come back here, because I don't know. I didn't even get to like 75% of the stuff I had here. So, but this is great. It'll be a good one because we get the questions around guesting on other shows a lot. So I think this is a good primer to help people do the proper research, before they do that outreach and to find the best shows that are really right for them. And that's really what it's all about.
Love it. Yeah. Thanks for having me. It's awesome to actually chop it up with you. And like I said, this would probably be one of a couple conversations we'll have.
Awesome. Thanks again, Trent.
Cool.
Appreciate it.
Cheers, Tristan.